I'm Craig from Consultant Advisory. This tutorial series covers the Excel 2016 Expert Curriculum. Download the file linked in the description and let's work through it together as we continue reviewing Part 2 of Section 2.3, Custom Workbook Elements. Let's get started. Learning to use macros can save a whole lot of time in your daily routines. There's two key benefits, in my opinion, from using macros. The first is for helping you out with short tasks that you run frequently. So if you have a process that takes you 10 seconds to do, but you have to do it 10 times a day, if you can cut that down to a 1 second macro routine, you save yourself over the course of months and over the course of a year a phenomenal amount of time. So they're great for quick little things to help you speed up your routine. Second is if you have long tasks or tasks that require a very precise set of steps that might take you 15 or 20 or even 30 minutes to go through. By creating a macro, those can be run in seconds. For one of my main models I built, when I first had the workbook, there was a whole bunch of scenarios that had to be run, where you'd have to do one step, then 2 steps, run a chart, step 3, step 4, run a chart. Well, it would take me 45 minutes, and I'd go through it, and then at the end, someone would want to make a change. I'd have to go back and do it all again. Now, by learning how to turn that into a macro, I was able to reduce that into about a 45-second macro run, so I could run the macro, show the results to a manager. If they had any questions or needed something changed, not a big deal because it only took me a couple minutes to do it all over again. So a huge improvement. Now, that being said, make sure you avoid creating what I refer to as macro black boxes. So a macro that does a whole bunch of stuff or a whole bunch of calculations that are tough for an independent viewer to understand or to follow or to audit. So they're great if they're doing routines that are simple and straightforward. It's just that there's a bunch of them, but they're easy to understand on a broken down basis. But try to avoid macros that take one piece of data and at the end you end up with a new piece of data without any understanding for the user of how it got from the beginning to the end. So let's start off with one of our simple macros. In the first video of this chapter, we talked about how I like to use styles, but one of the problems with them is that they aren't very handy to use a keyboard. So what I've done is I've created a bunch of simple little macros that apply to a style to a cell. So you'll notice over here, this is the list of the styles that I like to use. Well, I also have macro shortcuts that I like to assign to them, so that when I need that particular type of cell applied, all I do is run the macro. Takes a split second rather than having to navigate into the home tab on my ribbon and selecting the style that I need. So let's record a macro that's going to assign the input style, and this will be one of the simplest macros that you'll ever record. So what you need to do is, if you don't have the developer tab active in your workbook, you need to have that active now in order to record a macro, and that's recorded in one of the chapter 1 videos, so I do have that available for you. So we're going to record our macro to our personal macro workbook. So we can start by selecting the record macro function here in the bottom left. We are going to store this in our personal macro workbook, and I'm going to call this input style. My shortcut key is going to be Shift-I. And all I've had to do is hold down Shift and I, and you'll notice that this now says Control-Shift-I in order to run it. And for the description, we'll put applies the input style to selected cells. So having description is valuable because if you come back to this in a few months and you can't remember what it does, it's all right here for you. So we're going to click OK. Now, you'll notice now in the bottom left-hand corner, this is now a square. And if you hover over it, you can't see it in the video, but it says that a macro is currently recording. So I can move my mouse, and that's not going to get recorded. What is going to get recorded, though, is any clicks that I make, any entries onto the keyboard. So I want to apply the input style to the selected cell. Now, I'm not going to click any new cells, because if I do that, the recorder is going to say, oh, go to this cell at first and then apply the macro. So I'm just going to leave it with the cell that's highlighted. I'm going to go to the Home tab in my ribbon. I'm going to go to Cell Styles, and I'm going to go to Input. Okay, you've now noticed that that cell has changed. Okay, and once that's done, I'm now going to hit this square to stop recording. Now, that's one of the common things that new macro recorders forget to do, is to stop recording, and you end up with this macro that's recorded the last 30 minutes of your work, which makes it pretty useless. But let's test this out. I'm going to select a new cell. I'm going to hit Control-Shift-I, and sure enough, it has become the input style. Let's test this out by entering an input. Perfect. It's got the style and the design that I want. Sure enough, there's the number format that I wanted. All right, so you've passed the first macro test. Now what we want to do is change or add a new macro by editing a macro in our VBA editor. So we're going to change and create a macro to apply the calculation format rather than the input one. So we're going to go into the VBA editor by hitting Alt F11. And when we go into here, you're going to see on the upper left-hand corner here, so this is a list of your open files. So the first one is this shared custom workbook, or this shared custom workbook elements, which is the file that you're working in. What we care about, though, is the one that says personal XLSB. So when we recorded our previous macro, it should have gone into this personal one. And inside of here, you'll notice modules. If yours isn't open, you can hit that plus. And inside here, you'll see module. Yours will probably be module 1, most likely. But if you go to the highest number, that's the most recent one that you started recording. But if you open this up, you are going to see the macro. So sure enough, here is our macro name, which was input style. These things that are behind the apostrophe are comments. So Excel effectively ignores these when it runs the macro. So anything that's behind that apostrophe doesn't impact how it runs, but they're notes to the user or to the developer when they want to make any changes. It helps them understand what the code is. This line here without the apostrophe is the actual macro. So this is probably the world's simplest macro. All it's doing is to the selected cell, it's applying the style of input. So if we want to change this to a calculation macro, all I need to do is I'm going to just copy this just like I normally would. I'm going to hit Control-C to copy. I'm going to go to the end. I'm going to paste by hitting Control-V. And so now you'll see an exact copy. But let's edit it though. So instead of input style, I'm going to call this calc style for calculation. I'm going to change this here, call this calc style in this comment. This time, instead of applying the input style, it's going to apply the calculation style to the selected cells. The shortcut, I can't edit that from this screen, so I'm going to delete this. And now for selection style equals input, all I need to do is change what's inside the quotation marks here. If I change this to calculation, the important thing here is the spelling of this has to match the name of your style. So in this case, we have a calculation style. So I am going to type in calculation here. If I have problems with my macro, it's likely that my spelling doesn't match the spelling of the style. So now when I go back to my workbook here, and I can apply the calculation style to it. Now I don't have a shortcut yet, so in order to do that, I'm going to go to Developer, I'm going to go to Macros, I'm going to select this calculation style here in my macro list, and I'm going to hit Options, and here's where I put in my shortcut. So I'm going to hit Shift-C for my calculation style input. I don't need to worry about the description, that's already in the comment. I'll select OK. I'll close this off, and now if I hit Control-Shift-C, you'll notice that the text color has changed from blue to brown. Now the background hasn't changed, and that's because if we go to our style, and if I go to calculation here and select modify, you'll notice that the fill is not checked. So when I run calculation, it's not going to change what the background was. So that won't look any different. What it does is it changes it to a locked cell. It forces the font to be this particular style. bold and this particular color. And lastly, it forces the number format. But alignment, border, fill, it just ignores whatever was there before. It's not going to change. So I'll hit cancel because I don't want to change that. Next, now that we've used the VBA editor, you can actually use VBA code that's been written by anyone and copy it into your workbook. Now, you should make sure that you only get it from a credible source, as someone could hide some malicious code. So you may not necessarily want to just grab every bit of code that you see online. But one thing you can do is if you want to create your own macros, you can look and see the code that other people have used and kind of just grab the pieces that that you might find interesting or needed. What I've done is I've created I've included a couple macros at the bottom of this worksheet that you may find useful. First off was I talked about in the first part of this chapter how if you have so many styles, you end up with tons that aren't useful, and you end up with an unwieldy style list. So this is a macro here that's going to remove all the custom styles and just leave you with the standard ones. All I need to do is highlight this text. I'm going to hit copy. I'm going to go to my VBA editor, and in the same module as the other ones, I'm now just going to hit paste. Okay, and so now in my personal macro workbook, I have this style kill. Now I'm not going to add a custom keystroke to this because I don't expect I'm going to run this very often. But it's handy if in 6 months or a year I end up with someone else's workbook and it's got all these crazy styles, I'll be able to go, oh yeah, I have a macro that will get rid of all of these for me. And in order to access it, you'll just go into the developer, macros, and sure enough, there is style kill ready for me. The other one I've included here is a macro to unhide multiple sheets. Again, I'm sure you'll never do this, create a whole bunch of hidden tabs in a workbook, because it's bad practice, but you may end up with a inherited workbook that someone else has created that has all of these, and Excel only lets you unhide one tab at a time. If there's only 1 or 2 hidden tabs, that's not a big deal, but I've had workbooks that have literally had 30 or 40 hidden tabs in them, and it would take me a long time to open all of them up. So this macro, if we highlight this, we'll copy it. Let me just, excuse me, I'll copy it here. Is a macro that will unhide them all with one keystroke. I'm going to go into my macro editor. I'm going to go to the bottom here. I'm going to add this in, and now I have a macro that will unhide all hidden worksheets in the active workbook all at once. So a process that might have taken me 5 minutes or 10 minutes or even more, not to mention the mental frustration that goes with that. I can now just run this macro. They all get unhidden, and it's going to take 10 seconds rather than 10 minutes. So you won't use it very much, but when you do need to use it, it will be a true lifesaver for you. It's here in my personal macro workbook, so that's going to be available to me. Any workbook that I open, I'm going to be able to call up these macros. I'm not going to have to worry about trying to find it again. So the personal macro workbook is handy for this, because if you find macros that you like to use, rarely, but they're valuable when you do use them, just pop them into this personal macro workbook and they'll be there for you whenever you need it. All you need to do is make sure you save. So we'll go back Alt here. I'm going to hit, you would just hit the save here, and then that way they'll be available for you the next time you use it. Lastly, we're going to take a look at form controls. So if we go into the last tab in this workbook, we'll get our form controls. And so when you're designing a workbook, I always find it valuable to segregate your inputs from, or your input tab from your working tab. So all your inputs are one place, all your calculations are in a separate place. You don't want to have them kind of all mixed up, at least in my opinion, and in the opinion of a lot of modelers. However, that can cause some difficulties, because sometimes I'm in my workbook and were some calculations, and boy, I'd really like to see how it responds when I change an input. And rather than having to go back to my input tab and make that change, form controls are a great way that allow you to manipulate your model without breaking the segregation rule of keeping your inputs separate from your workings. So I have most of the control forms set up already in this worksheet, but I'll run through how they all work so that you'll know how to use them, even if we may not necessarily create them all in this video. The first one is a command button. And so a command button when it's pressed, will run a macro that's assigned to it. So to access or to add a form, it's in our developer tab again. So if we select developer, we're going to go to insert. All right, and so what we care about are the form controls in the top half. The ActiveX controls we're not going to worry about in this video. It's not going to be on your exam. So the first one here is the button. When I select that, it doesn't really look any different. I just get a cursor here, and what happens is I'm going to drag this cursor, and it's going to give me a macro to assign to it. So let's see what's in this workbook. All right, so there's reset value on click. I'm going to select that macro. I'll click OK. And so now I have a button. When this button is pushed by a user, the macro will run. If the button doesn't get pressed, nothing will happen. It's always good to make sure that we have a good description to it. So we're going to edit the text here. And this will say reset values. You'll notice it's going to match the one that's already on the tab here. All right, and so this, if you have a whole bunch of inputs that you might need to frequently change, we'll just hit reset values here. And when I do that, everything effectively gets zeroed out so that I know that I'm working from a clean slate again. In order to delete this, right-click it, hit escape, and then hit delete, and then that button is going to be gone. The other thing you can do, if you right-click on it, you can assign a new macro. So let's say you want to have a different macro assigned to it. Very simple to do. And we can also have some other controls here. So do we want it to move? Do we want it protected, that if we lock the sheet, no one can use it? We can move and size it with cells. We can choose how big it is. We can have alt text that if someone hovers over it, it'll pop up to give them a little bit more description, all with this command button. Now that we're familiar with how to put in a command button, I want to go through all the different form controls. So I've set up, I guess, kind of a little bit of a messy looking sample sheet here, but more importantly, it gives us a chance to go through all of the different form controls and see how they work. Hopefully along the way, I'll be able to give you a few ideas of not only the skills to pass the exam, but how you can use this in your regular modeling work. So the first one we're going to look at is a combo box. Now for all of the form controls, they're accessed through the developer tab of your ribbon. We're going to select insert here in the middle, and then here are all of our form controls. I'm not going to demonstrate how to open up each one. Know that if we want a combo box, that we're going to go to the second one here, a checkbox, but they're all right here. Once you select one of them, they operate very similar in that you're going to draw the combo box the size that you want, and then once you have that created, you're going to make adjustments to it and select the cells that you want to make it active. So I already have one. Let me just delete this one here. So I already have a combo box created here. So what we're going to do is I'll show you how to set this up. So we right click on it. We are going to go to format control. Okay, and once we are into format control, it's going to show us our input range. So this is going to be the cells that show up on our drop-down list. I've selected these 4 cells over here in column O. The cell link is where it is going to provide the result. And effectively all it's doing is it's looking at these 4 cells here in our list, and if I select the first one, it's going to output a 1. If I select the second one, it's going to output a 2, so on down the list. This drop-down lines here is just basically how big the drop-down is going to be once I actually click on the arrow. If you're only going to have 4 items, you probably don't need to show 8 lines, but you have some control. Now, if you have more items than lines, don't worry, you're going to still be able to scroll through them. They're just not going to all show up when it's first selected. So normally you would select those, you'd click OK. I'm going to do that here as well. So here is my combo box. So when I click on this, you can see here are the same 4 items that are over here in my selection, my input range here. And so when I select the first one, there's going to be an output. And in this case, it outputs into this cell here. If I go down to the second one, it's now going to give output number 2. If I go to the third one, there's number 3 for me. So essentially, that's all it's doing. It's almost like a VLOOKUP, except it's outputting the item in order that you select. If I want the first one, it gives a 1, gives a 2. If the second, third, fourth, so on. If I had 30 items, it would continue to go through all of them. Now, that may not seem like anything too special at this point, but hopefully I'll be able to demonstrate how this can be a very powerful tool for you. A checkbox is a little simpler. In this case, a checkbox just toggles on or off a particular value. So here is my checkbox. I can toggle it on or off. And all that's happening when I toggle that is it changes a cell from true to false. Now, if we remember with Excel, a true is a 1, a false is a 0, but essentially it's true or false. So in this case, I have this linked over to this cell here. So when this is untoggled or unchecked, this shows false. When I toggle it on, this changes to true. Now, how we set that up is after you've created it, you go into form control. We are going to select our cell link. So in this case, our cell link is this cell right here. Now, this is just its default position when you create it. So now we can see that when I toggle this on or off, it's true or false. So now that we've done this, let's maybe take a quick idea of what kind of ability this gives us. So over here on the right, I've set up a quick little table here. So these again are my options. In this case, these are fuel products. This is the margin of the product, the profit gross margin, and this is its cost of sales. When we combine those, we're going to get the revenue when that particular item is sold. Now, with my drop-down list, I can give the user the ability to choose their product. And now the revenue is displayed corresponding to the product selected. So all this is doing is it's taking this number 1 and then it's looking in this table to whatever the first column is and adding those two values together to get the revenue. This tax toggle box here is choosing whether we want to add tax to that value. So when it's toggled on, we include taxes. When it's not toggled, it's no longer included. So we're just seeing kind of the actual company revenue rather than the cash in. If my taxes is on, this is actually how much the company is collecting. So if we're trying to calculate what our costs for credit card fees or what have you, that we'd have to consider this value. But if we just care about corporate revenues, we don't have to have that toggled on. Now, what's nice about this is that there may be somewhere else on another sheet or later in this a big sheet where the user may want to toggle these on or off again. So we can actually copy this and paste it somewhere else on the sheet. And so now I have two controls that basically do the same thing. And if I untoggle this one, they are synchronized, so they both will show the same value. So now there's multiple places in the worksheet that we can do that. If we go into the format control and the cell link, if instead of just having the absolute link to the cell, if I add the tab name with an exclamation mark at the end and click OK. So now I can take this, let's cut that and put it on a different sheet now and paste this on or off. So now I can toggle this off, and when I go back here, sure enough, it is still linked. So that is something that I use all the time. And again, it lets me have all my inputs in one place, but I can still give the user some controls even if on some of the working sheets. So obviously we wouldn't need to have this one on this sheet. It's just more of an example for you. So I will delete it here. And I did that by right-clicking, hitting escape, and then my delete key. And we'll go back here and take a look at some of the rest of these. So a spin button is going to have a similar effect. So in this case, a spin button has an output, okay, which is going to be the same cell as what I selected before, this cell here. And what happens is we can add a high value the maximum value, and a low value on the spinner box, as well as what the incremental changes. So we can say, hey, you can go from 0 to 10, 0 to 100. In this case, I have it selected 0 till 4. And when I select either up or down on this spinner, if I go up, it should advance this up by 1 number. So let's try it out and see. Perfect. So that's gone up by 1 number. Now you've noticed when I did that, this value has now changed to gas mid, because this is actually a two-way communication. If I select this as 1, it's going to show gasoline red. But if I change this value to 2, it's the second selection. 3, it's the third. And now 4th, it's the 4th. Now, I can't go any higher than that because I've limited it, but I can go back down to where I started, even down to 0. So in fact, if I don't want that 0, I can change my minimum value to 1 now. So we'll click OK. And so now I can't spin off essentially the top of that list. I can go from 1 to 4, can't go to 0. But again, all of these are linked and they continually keep updating each other. So a list box is very similar to the combo box. So I have it that the user can select only from the provided list. In the combo box, it says that the user can actually enter a value. Now, they can't necessarily enter a new value, but they can start typing and it'll search the list and pull up the one that they want. So I could start typing diesel here, I believe. And okay, it didn't work. But anyways, the list box, it just displays the ones that we want. It sets up the same way through our format control, our input range, our cell link, whether we want you to be only able to select a single or multiple ones. But again, you'll notice that they're all linked. Lastly is the option buttons. So option buttons come linked. As soon as you create your second one, they're tied to the same as the first one that you've set up. So in this case, I have quick abbreviations here: R for regular, M for mid-grade, P for premium, D for diesel. When I select it, it's basically saying, okay, I've chosen the second option button that has been selected, or that has been created rather. If I were to create a new option button, so again, developer, insert, here's my option button, and draw it in here. Okay, here's my option button. And now if I were to click this one, it would now go up to 5. Okay, so it already knew that there was 4 created. As soon as I click this one, there's 5. Now, 5 doesn't work with, say, the rest of my setup. You'll notice here that my reference has gone to a pound ref and is no longer working. So we don't want to necessarily have that capability. So again, by right-clicking, escape and delete, I can get rid of that. A group box allows us, for example, checkboxes. If we group our checkboxes together, it precludes us from selecting more than one at a time. The last one, and this again is one that I use quite a bit, is a scroll bar. This one is slightly more involved than the other ones, so I'll step through it in a little bit more detail. So a scroll bar, in this case, I'm using my scroll bar to set up my tax rate. So this is my tax rate over here. Now the thing about a percent, if I want a percent, it's a decimal value. And with a scroll bar, when we set it up, we can't actually have decimal values. It's only integers. So again, we're going to set up our minimum value. We're going to set up our maximum value. We're going to set up the incremental change and then the paid change. So how this works is page change is when I click inside here. So we're at 1448. If I click in here, we're going to go up by 100 units just by toggling inside this movement area. If I use the arrow, I get a finer amount of control. So now I'm going up by 10 instead of the 100. Now, because I can't have a decimal, what I've done to create my percentage is I've actually linked to this cell here, and I'm dividing it by, in this case, 10,000. Now, if you don't need to have fractions of a percent, you could maybe make this a smaller range. So instead of 1 to 100 or 1 to 1,000. But because I wanted to have a little bit more decimal visibility and impact, I have made it 4 digits, and then I'm dividing by a higher number. Now, I can still use my mouse and guide this scroll anywhere that I would like. And like with the other ones, I can copy this, I can paste it, and now I can have multiple scroll in different area, and they will stay synchronized. So let's say I wanted one over here, right by my tax rate. Since this is where I want to look, I can move this over here, and sure enough, there's my percent. But I have limited my user as far as what range they can go. They are maxed out at 100%. They can't go any higher than that. They can't go any lower than 0. If we go all the way to the left here, 0 is the smallest number that they can go to. So I have I have the ability as the model designer to provide flexibility for my users, but to give them kind of safety barriers that they can't go too far one way or another. Thank you for following along here in section 2.3. Stay tuned, and I look forward to helping you work through our next section in the Excel Expert Exam. Thanks for watching. This is Craig with Untitled Advisory.